There's a certain like 1950s ethos about, vibe maybe going. Is this just a moment in time for you, or just passing?
No, I mean, I do love, I
those
love
classic like Coke
yes,
adverts,
yes, and the car. I mean, it partly is due to my by earthquake. It's partly due to a kind of nostalgia that I have for the US, because I left in 1990 and moved to Japan, and and then lived in Brussels, and then finally came to London to live, for the rest. So that's by plague. So and partly it's also with the books that I'll bring home books about, the Civil War and guns. There's some beautiful books with guns. I mean, I'm really against guns, but as I'd love them to all become objects in a museum, because they can be really beautiful. That one's going sadly. But there are some positive ones. That one is, who will die calmly.
Yes, if you can.
Yeah. Anyway, and so it just it goes on, and that one also. There are quite a few, like with slumber and and this one is confusion. Who will die by confusion, and that I just thought, people believing in cults, obviously
like QAnon,
could ultimately kill somebody. So I'm very involved with US politics as well. And yes, and so what you notice with US politics is that there are people who keep harkening back to the 1950s, and
really,
because that's like supposed to be the golden era, and of course it wasn't, and women certainly weren't emancipated. There was so little diversity, and it was a very tiny minority of people who had it all. The collage Haggadah.
Oh yes,
and
about that.
So
what was
so that is a book used every year on Passover by Jewish people, and they read through it, and it's a celebration of spring and a celebration of liberation, the Exodus from Egypt. So so this is a kind of rebirth.
I mean, this is one of the sort of founding Jewish stories, and the Passover, crossing the Red Sea,
exactly,
and liberation.
Yes, and this is the golden calf.
Yes,
this was actually an example of a print collage, because I made an etching of this ear with the ear trumpet, and then this is the Hebrew word for God, and so it's a shortening of it. And so the people are listening out, for God, and for God liberating them. But there's the kind of universal refugee story, and then and then there are ones that are very, very specific, to this is Aaron, and this is Miriam, Moses's sister and brother. A Bulgarian woman found me on Instagram and said, "I'm doing an exhibition about the amazing unknown story about how no Jews were deported from Bulgaria during the war," and which is, I'd never heard of that. And she said, I love constellations and stars, and so that has to be in it. It was very prescriptive. It has to be. So I did research, and I learned the whole story, and there's actually a terrific film about it. And I decided to really give myself constraints, and so it was just, my pictures were just going to be black and white and yellow, coming from the stars. And And so I made about 15 collages on this subject, with referring to all the details of that, and then they were shown at the Bulgarian embassy. And that was something that I thought, yes, I'd like to find another project where I really force myself into a tiny box, because it is interesting, when you put a lot of constraints on yourself, what can come out. Most of the time, I'm putting no constraints. And so, we have a fig tree. We had a fig tree in our garden.
Okay.
And during COVID, I did a lot of prints.
Is that a?
Yes.
It looks.
I know.
And I would have said this. But
yes, so these are the baby ones, and then this is. I think it's called a. I can't remember. There's a certain kinds of fig tree, where they're and so this was that same gold paper, and yes, and so this was a print that I made, and then I collaged around it, and I did a lot of pictures like that, and most of them were sewn up very carefully with frames, and but I've started kind of going out of the perfect. That's typical of me, kind of trying to stay within, but I'm trying to push out of the rectangle or push out of the square. Yeah. And so you can see the very tip of the flag. This writing actually comes from, I have volunteered at schools for years, and helping with, raising interest in reading and writing, and so, and I did a bit of art education as well. But so sometimes I'd save work that was going to go into the recycling bin, and because I just think that I also feel like handwriting. There's so much there's so much ephemera. The writing on the back of postcards and stuff. This is by Michelle Thompson. She's one of my big inspirations, and she's she works a lot in media.
This for me evokes sort of typical suburbia of a certain period of time because of the car, and then intersected and by these dots that feel a bit Damien Hirsty.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering why these dots appear here.
Well, as part of my, getting obsessed with dots moment, Damien Hirst, when I first moved here, he was also really just coming out of art school in a big way, and so the dots, dot pictures were quite amazing because they were beautiful, and yet they were one of those kind of things like you thought, why didn't anyone think about this before? And then the question is, does he own dots? Does he own white background with dots? And actually he doesn't. He can't. And so I'm reclaiming them, and
and so this is your current battle.
Nostalgia for simplicity, time past, and in a way, yes, it does have signs of suburbia, but in fact, the barn makes it really, countryside to me, and just the middle of nowhere, and there are just so many people who are kind of cut off from all the stimulus and just take their tricycles and just keep going round and round.